If you were to hop onto TF2 right now and join a game of casual as pyro, and you had to use one of these 4 flare guns, which would you choose? A little while ago, I asked this question in a community post, which I'll show you all the results to in a moment. To provide some context, I've been wanting to post a video discussing the Detonator for a long time now, even before I made this channel. In my opinion, it's one of the most, if not the most, misunderstood, misinterpreted, and misjudged weapon in Team Fortress 2. But before I begin to explain why, let's take a look at some of the arguments and conclusions other YouTubers have made about this weapon. From El Maxo's Pyro's most underrated weapon, the Detonator occupies this little niche where offensively it's nothing to write home about. It's not as reliable as the Scorch shot. It isn't in the best place right now. In 4 words, he sums it up as the more jumpy, less shooty flare gun. From Nate Fox's TF2, the Detonator is awesome. Out of all the secondary weapons Pyro has, I wouldn't say it's the most practical to use. You can't use the Detonator in every map and be useful with it. When you use the Detonator, you need to make sure to rely on your primary and melee weapon the most, because that's going to be doing the most damage. From Minty Coffee's TF2 Detonator vs Scorch shot. It is a great weapon for flanking and roaming behind enemy lines and is most suited to said playstyle. You're not going to get the most out of the Detonator if you sit by your team spamming it at people. And lastly, from Fish on a Stick Gaming's TF2, the Scorch shot is evil. Using the Detonator to flank to unexpected areas is a lot of fun. Just looking at what these people have said, the consensus seems to be this. The Detonator is more of a tool used for mobility purposes rather than a weapon used for dealing damage, and is outclassed by the other flare guns when it comes to combat effectiveness, damage per second, and skill. It is a situational weapon that lacks offensive and defensive capabilities and should be reserved for maps where you can Detonator jump to flank enemies. It is outclassed by the Scorch shot and even the stock flare gun with regard to damage output. It is a fun weapon. Looking back at the poll results, the Scorch shot took the #1 spot, followed by the Detonator and stock flare gun virtually tied at second, and lastly, the Man Melter. It's no surprise to me that the Scorch shot took the #1 spot, but the Detonator tied with the stock flare gun shows that maybe the consensus on the Detonator, which is that it's not very viable, is off. To understand why, let's first look at some scenarios I created. In this first scenario, I make easy contact with the enemy around the wall without having to hit a nearby surface. This can be more clearly seen in the second scenario, where it is impossible for me to hit this enemy using the Scorch shot, but when I switch to the Detonator, I can easily hit him from above, dealing consistent damage. Again, in this third scenario, I have no problem hitting the enemy with the Detonator. I don't even need to be accurate. But because the enemy is elevated, the only way for me to reach him with a Scorch shot is with a direct hit. It might not seem like that big of a deal at such a close range, but as you distance yourself from the enemy, this difference manifests. So, from these tests, hitting enemies with a Detonator is significantly easier than hitting them with a Scorch shot, and it produces a consistent stream of damage. Now you might be thinking, no LED, you're wrong, because the Scorch shot is easier to use and you can hit people twice with one flare, which does way more damage than the Detonator. Regarding the first half of that statement, I disagree and see that the Detonator is actually easier to use. Yes, the timing of the detonation can be tricky to learn at first, but it's not as hard as using the direct hit, getting headshots, or hitting pipes. In other words, once you get just a little familiar with it, you rarely miss shots from ill-timed detonations. Now the second half of that statement about double hits is true, but it is very situational and requires 2 conditions. First, you have to direct hit an enemy with a flare. Second, the enemy has to be standing in the proximity of the flare when it bounces off of them and hits the ground. Direct hits with the Scorch shot are not easier to hit than splash hits with the Detonator, and your flare hitting the enemy a second time after making initial contact isn't within your control. And when going for direct hits with the Scorch shot, your misses often go sailing behind the enemy, hitting nothing, making it useful only in choky corridors with a lot of bodies. But even in those scenarios, I think it's easier to hit more enemies with the Detonator just by shooting and detonating your flare above their heads which guarantees that you hit all of them rather than just the couple of guys in the front. Going back to the start of this video, I posted a comment made by Minty Coffee that reads, "You're not going to get the most out of the detonator if you sit by your team spamming it at people." But this couldn't be further from the truth. And I think that he, as well as many others, believe this because they think that all forms of damage should be intended to be finishing blows, like a sniper's headshots or a demo man's sticky trap. But this isn't true. Being able to deal consistent chip damage from a long range within the security of your teammates is extremely effective. It eats up and disrupts enemies' medics' overheal rate. It forces enemy classes to pile up around nearby dispensers or grab med boxes. Its afterburn chips away HP, rendering more of your teammates' attacks as finishing blows. And it even gets kills quite often, especially on lighter classes like Scout, Spy, and Sniper. Well, sure LED, all of this sounds good in theory, but how does it actually play out in-game? YouTuber Voraby ran his own testing comparing the Detonator versus the Scorch shot in his video titled TF2, Is Detonator Better Than the Scorch Shot? Spam Experiment. If you want to know what the exact numbers were, go check out his video, but to sum it all up, he achieved significantly more damage per minute with the Detonator than the Scorch shot. If the Detonator is just a utility weapon used for flanking and isn't practical for fighting, how did Voraby arrive at these results? I'll let you answer that one. To wrap up this video, I want to share something that Voraby said during his experiment. As soon as some big YouTuber made a video about the Scorch shot, calling it OP, all the people jumped onto this bandwagon of Scorch shot hate. Perhaps he's right. Perhaps, instead of getting all emotional about our hatred toward a particular weapon and letting it skew our understanding and appreciation for other weapons, we should approach our concerns and curiosities rationally based on our own conclusions we draw from actual evidence. Because the evidence shows us that the Detonator isn't just useful for flare jumping around the map and flanking enemies. It can be viable and practical for damaging and disrupting them too. Yes, it is underrated. And yes, it is fun, but not because it is just another sticky jumper. By the way, there are some additional advantages of the Detonator that I didn't bring up in my main analysis, one of which is how you can flare jump toward enemies in an offensive manner, which is useful for finishing them off when they're trying to escape, or for closing the distance gap and finishing them off with your flamethrower. Another is how you're practically able to disable enemy snipers thanks to the flinch that the afterburn gives. And if they have a height advantage, it doesn't matter because you won't need to hit a nearby surface to ignite them in the first place. So let me know down in the comments what your thoughts about all of this are. Maybe you totally agree, maybe you don't. And maybe there are some things that I failed to mention that are worth noting. I will be reading every comment, so don't think that your opinion will be ignored. Thank you so much for making it this far into the video. I will see you all next week, but for now, this is LED switching off.